Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the very first of the Newsmakers interview series here at Patrick Henry College this year. And I'm going to introduce both of our participants today in this very interesting, very exciting interview. I want to thank you all for joining us. The first person I'm going to introduce is Dr. Marvin Olasky. He is the inaugural holder of the college's Distinguished Chair in Journalism and Public Policy. Dr. Olasky also serves our college as a professor of journalism and remains, of course, the editor-in-chief of World Magazine, which is a highly respected journal of news and analysis. He is an accomplished journalist, scholar, and academic leader. Marvin's authored more than 20 books and hundreds of articles for national publications on journalism and media, history, public policy, the sanctity of human life, and Christianity's intersection with culture. Two of his books, The Tragedy of American Compassion and Compassionate Conservatism, played an important role in the struggle for welfare reform for the poor in the 1990s. President George W. Bush called Dr. Olasky compassionate conservatism's leading thinker. What makes his analysis of public policy issues so potent is that all of Marvin's accomplishments have been built on the foundation of his love for Jesus Christ and his commitment to the Bible as the inerrant Word of God. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Marvin Olasky. And our special guest is Melanie Kirkpatrick, who's a writer-journalist based in Connecticut and a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. She contributes reviews and commentary to various publications, including the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, for which she worked from 1980 until mid-2009. Her book, Escape from North Korea, which is the reason we're here today, subtitled The Untold Story of Asia's Underground Railroad, will be published in September by Encounter Books, and tells the fascinating story of the thousands of North Koreans fleeing that repressive state along what's been called Asia's new Underground Railroad. Today, those escapees are sharing the horrors of North Korea with the world while sowing seeds of change within that country. At the Wall Street Journal, Melanie was the deputy editor of the editorial page from 2006 to 2009 and a longtime member of the editorial board, managing the editorial page's coverage of international issues throughout Asia and Europe, writing frequent editorials and op-eds on foreign affairs. Melanie has served the journal in many editorial roles throughout the years, but also spent 10 years in Asia, working for the Wall Street Journal Asia in Hong Kong, and prior to that for a division of Time Life Books in Tokyo. She received a bachelor's degree from Princeton and a master's degree from University of Toronto, and was a Gannett Newspaper Foundation Fellow in Asian Studies at the University of Hawaii. Ms. Kirkpatrick is married to Jack David, who's a senior fellow and trustee of the Hudson Institute, and we're delighted to have you here at Patrick Henry College. So please join me in helping me to welcome Melanie Kirkpatrick.
Well, thank you all for coming. And I want to say first, and this isn't something I say all that much, I mean, this is a terrific book. It is a wonderful job of reporting. It's very readable. It'll be coming out next month. I hope you all get a chance to look at it, because it tells a story that most of us are not very familiar with at all. I mean, some of you know a little bit, I suspect, about North Korea. A lot of you may know almost nothing at all, because in many ways it is the terra incognita of the world right now. People have said that if you fly over around the world, I mean, you'll see lights all over the place. You won't see much in North Korea. So, Melanie, maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about what that society is like and the information blackout that folks there have.
Well, first let me say what a pleasure it is to be here at your beautiful college on opening day, I gather. It's really a lovely spot, and I thank Dr. Ferris and Dr. Olasky for having me here. North Korea, you're right, Marvin, is unlike any other place in the world. There's a famous satellite image of it that shows the Korean peninsula at night. South Korea is filled with bright lights up and down its half of the peninsula. And in North Korea, there's a little bit of light around Pyongyang, but the rest is black. When I interviewed a North Korean who had escaped, she was living in Rochester, New York, of all places, and a quiet, small city in America. I asked her if there was anything she missed, and her answer was the darkness. She was so used to being in the dark that the big lights of Rochester, New York, were a little overwhelming to her.
And it's not just the dark as far as electricity. We are wired right now. I mean, we all are used to, whether through iPads or computers, whatever, a click, 2 clicks, and we can find out to some extent what's going on in other parts of the world. What do people in North Korea know about what's going on in the rest of the world?
North Korea is a truly sealed society. Every communist regime, every totalitarian regime wants to control information, and because knowledge is power. But North Korea the Kim family regime has been able to take that to a new extreme. And there's very little information that gets in or has gotten in or out of North Korea until recently. And this is one of the things I write about in Escape from North Korea, is the impact that the people who have escaped have had on the friends and family they've left behind. In North Korea today, you can't make a phone call outside the country, you can't send a letter, you can't have access to the internet, you can't go on Facebook. There's no way for somebody from North Korea to communicate with the outside world. However, because of the people who've escaped, stories have gotten in to North Korea about the rest of the world, and people are beginning to wake up.
Now, the title of this, again, Escape from North Korea, but the subtitle, The Untold Story of Asia's Underground Railroad. Now, that's an expression, Underground Railroad, that resonates powerfully in American history. Mm-hmm. I suspect most of you are familiar with the Underground Railroad that existed in the mid-19th century to help escaped slaves make their way to Canada. What's the Underground Railroad in Asia?
The Underground Railroad in Asia begins in northeast China, near the border with North Korea. And the term was coined by some Christian rescuers in the late 1990s and early 2000s who decided that they wanted to model their rescue attempts on the Underground Railroad in the antebellum South in America. And it's very similar to the original Underground Railroad in that it's a network of safe houses and secret transit routes that help people get across China. Now, you would think that if you wanted to go from northeast China next to North Korea to South Korea, all you would do is go south to South Korea. Or if you're in North Korea, go south. You can't do that because of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone that separates the two countries. At the end of the Korean War in 1953, the DMZ was set up, and it is now called the world's most militarized border. And there's no way that people can get across that border. It's heavily fortified. So instead, North Koreans go north, they go to China, and then in China they hook up usually with, often with a local Christian community, and eventually they may get access to the Underground Railroad, and they go all the way across China, usually to a Southeast Asian country such as Thailand or Laos or Vietnam, sometimes north to Mongolia. And from there, they will head to the South Korean embassy and ask for the help of the South Koreans, who will then, if all goes well, help them get to South Korea.
Now, besides being blocked from the rest of the world as far as information, that doesn't seem pleasant, but it's not something by itself that might lead people to want to risk their lives to escape. What really propels people to try to get out from North Korea?
There's several reasons. In the late 1990s, there was a famine in North Korea, and about a tenth of the population died. And many people fled across the border to China seeking food or seeking jobs, and at the height of the aftermath of the famine, probably the late 90s, early 2000s, they were estimated to be about 500,000 North Koreans hiding in China. So that's one group of people, people who are seeking food. A lot of people, though, get to go there to seek food or work, and then they get to China and they see the relative freedoms that are offered to them there, and they make the decision to go to South Korea. Another group of people who leave are real defectors. They're people who are carrying with them state secrets, or maybe are professionally trained and they want to get out. There was a classical pianist who I interviewed who had escaped, and he escaped because he wanted to play jazz, and jazz is forbidden in North Korea. It's, as you can imagine, jazz is a very independent-minded, free-flowing kind of music, and the government does not like anything that encourages independent thought, so jazz is taboo.
So to get then out of North Korea going north, they have to cross a river into China. But it's not just the river that's the obstacle. There are other obstacles, right?
Yes, the river is an obstacle for many because most North Koreans can't swim. So they'll wait for winter when they can walk across the border or the river, or in parts of the summer it might dry up so they can wade across. But that's not the real deterrent. The real deterrent is the North Korean border guards, who do not hesitate to shoot people in the back as they're crossing the border. And I can't tell you the number of refugees I've interviewed who said they were so scared that they were going to be shot as they were making a dash for freedom.
Any sense of what percentage of the people who try to escape that way actually make it?
No, I have no idea. It's just impossible to tell. And also, you have to remember that people escape several times. Mm-hmm. One thing I should have mentioned earlier is that China's policy, in contravention of its obligations under international law, China's policy is to track down North Koreans, arrest them, and send them back to North Korea, where they're treated very harshly. But incredibly, people will escape several times before they finally reach the Underground Railroad and then make it to safety in the West.
And so, as people, let's say, if they've gotten across the river, they've avoided being shot by the border guards or gone over landmines or other types of things there, they're in China, what's the piece of advice that lots of people are given? What's the first thing they look for?
I've heard this from so many people. The first thing they're told is, look for a building with a cross on it. Church people will help North Koreans. And as one boy I interviewed said to me, as he told his story, I had to ask the old lady who told me this. I said to her, what's a church? And he had never heard of a church. But he found a building with a cross on it. He got help from the pastor who directed him to a church in another city where he could get help. And that started him, it hooked him up with a network which started him on a path to freedom.
And the people who offer help, they're jeopardizing a lot themselves.
Very much so. As I mentioned, it's against the law in China to help a North Korean. And the one community in China who seems willing to help them are Christians. Along the border area, border with North Korea in China, there are a number of ethnically Korean people. Korean Chinese are one of China's official 55 minorities, and many of those people are Christians. Christian missionaries were very effective in the Korean Peninsula and in this area called Manchuria in now northeast China in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Billy Graham's wife, for example, was a medical missionary in North Korea, what is now North Korea and China, and she grew up there. And so, there is a Christian community still in the northeastern part of China, and if they are arrested, they can be arrested for helping a North Korean. Even giving somebody a meal is against the law. So what these churches and what the Christian individuals do will help people kind of reach the next leg, find a bigger church or find perhaps a South Korean or American group that might help them. But they're more likely to provide incidental help than permanent help.
Okay, so tell us about some of the next legs. If they've succeeded in getting across the river, if they have found a church or some Christian couple that will help them, what do they typically do next?
Typically, they'll hide out in China for a number, it could be many years. There are kind of two patterns nowadays. It used to be that North Koreans who got to China generally stayed there for quite a while before they made the decision to move on to South Korea. Because you have to remember, they would reach China with the image of South Korea or America or the West in their mind, the only image that they'd grown up with, and they thought of it as a terrifying place. And it would take a while for them to realize that South Korea was very different from what they've been told. So they might stay in China for several years. A number of refugees who got out had the experience of being arrested and sent back to North Korea and then having to escape a second time or even a third time before they got out. Another route now is that people who have escaped will sometimes hire couriers and brokers to help their families get out of North Korea, and then they leave China rather quickly. They just kind of pass through China. But the process can take years, or it could be a lot quicker. But more typical is that somebody will stay in China for a couple of years before he decides he wants to go to another country.
And then exit routes might be Laos, Thailand.
The exit routes are typically in the far west of China, where it borders Southeast Asian countries. So the nearest city is Kunming in Yunnan province. And from Kunming, they will probably walk across the border, often into Laos, sometimes into Burma, sometimes into Vietnam. It's the Golden Triangle area where opium has been smuggled for many years, and the human trafficker routes trafficking routes are very similar. And once they get to one of those countries, then they have they have to get to a South Korean consulate or a South Korean embassy.
And what's the attitude of South Korea towards the escapees?
South Korea's attitude has changed. The current president, Lee Myung-bak, took office in 2008, and he brought with him a very principled and moral attitude toward the refugees, in my mind. And under his administration, the South Korean facilities overseas have been told to accept any refugee who knocks on their door. Prior to that, however, were what a lot of people who help refugees referred to as the lost decade. This was the period when Kim Dae-jung and his successor were president. It was known as the years of the Sunshine Policy, and the South Korean government's official policy was to try to work with Pyongyang for more engagement with Pyongyang. And the government didn't want to talk about the people who escaped because or didn't want to help them because it was afraid that it would annoy Pyongyang and blow up their engagement policy. So the embassies and consulates were not hugely helpful. Of course, they still did help sometimes, and there were other problems too. For example, in one of the consulates that South Korea has in China, they had to close in the early 2000s. They had to close down the consulate for a couple of weeks because there were so many refugees trying to get in. They just closed the doors, said, we can't take anymore.
So tell us a little bit about numbers. Do we have a sense of how many actually escape in the course of a year, roughly?
It's in recent years, about 3,000 have reached South Korea every year. South Korea keeps close track of this. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but let me give you some figures by way of comparison. 20 years ago, 9 people got out. In 1992, 9 people reached South Korea. In 2002, I think the number was 153. And by 2008, the number was up around 2,000. Now it's about 3,000 a year.
Okay. And I've read that in North Korea, they're having big famine problems again. I mean, this is pretty customary, but even more than usual. And that would tend to indicate that there'll be more people facing a choice of either starvation or escape, who will try to escape.
It could indicate that, except for one factor, which is Kim Jong-un, the new leader, the new dictator of North Korea, who took office in December when Kim Jong-il died. He has issued a crackdown order along the border, and the word from my sources in South Korea and along the border is that fewer people are getting out. And in fact, in the first half of this year, about half as many people reached South Korea as did over the same time period last year.
Okay. So doesn't seem that we can expect things to get much better from any internal changes in the North Korean government.
There's been a number of commentators in recent months who have said it looks like change is finally coming to North Korea. But I've been covering this story for so many years. I've heard this so many times, and I'm highly skeptical.
So there are a couple of things that Americans concerned about this can do, and you tell stories about some who have really become personally involved. Mary and Jim, that couple. Maybe you can tell folks about them.
Mary and Jim, those are pseudonyms, is an American couple from the Midwest, and they their kids have graduated from college. They both have had successful careers. And a few years ago, they decided that they wanted to devote the rest of their lives to helping people. They are devout Christians, and their first thought was to go to Africa. And then they got thinking about it. They're Korean American. They speak Korean. And they said, well, we should go to China. And they made the decision to go to China. Their church and the organization they work for, Crossing Borders, supported them. And today they run a string of orphanages in northeast China for the children of Chinese men and North Korean women who have been sold as brides to Chinese men, and also for some 100% North Korean children. And they also have one shelter for young women who are in danger of being sold as brides.
And the children from parents, one Chinese, one North Korean, are usually considered in China to be impure?
Yes, both. It's a very sad situation. I refer to these children as half and half children, and they're rejected by both countries. Let me give you a little bit of background. When China arrests a North Korean woman and sends her back to North Korea, if she's pregnant, the North Korean policy is to abort the baby because she is carrying Chinese seed, which is considered impure. They want their children to be purely Korean. The methods of abortion are so horrible, I can't really even bring myself to talk about them. But this just gives you an attitude, an idea of the attitude of the North Koreans. The Chinese are also racist, I must say, and their attitude toward North Koreans is, very derisive. Very derogatory. They do not like them. And so these kids are rejected. Often, if the mother leaves, and mothers do leave on the Underground Railroad and leave their children behind, the fathers often reject them because they're impure. Some fathers care about their children, though, and feel that they would be better off in one of these orphanages run by Christians. And I'd like to say one other word about the orphanages. Mary and Jim are heroic figures in my book. I admire them enormously. But the foster parents who run these orphanages are taking even greater risks. They're Chinese citizens, and if they're caught taking care of these kids, and proselytizing, the children are all raised in Christian homes, and proselytizing is against the law in China, they could face severe repercussions.
So there's that aspect of it involving orphanages and forced abortions and so forth. Another aspect, I know a lot of students are interested in sex trafficking and in fighting against that. And so there's that element of it, because China's one-child policy has led to many fewer female babies than male babies.
Yes.
And tell us how that fits in.
Yes, in northeast China in particular, in the area that borders North Korea, there is a severe shortage of young women due to the one-child policy that's been in effect now for over 30 years. And these men are desperate for brides. The British Medical Journal has done a study and said that it looks like the ratio in northeast China, in some areas, of men to women is an amazing 14-to-1. So that gives you just an idea of how desperate some of these men are. And so they buy brides from North Korea. And sometimes the women are complicit. They know what they're doing, but they're desperate too. Imagine yourself a young woman in China. If you're a North Korean woman and you've crossed into China and you can't speak the language, you know that if you operate in the open, like try to get a job, in a real job, you'll be arrested and sent back to North Korea, where you'll be thrown into a prison camp and very brutally treated. So when given the option of marrying, quote unquote, because these marriages are not official, marrying a Chinese man, you might take it. Other women are tricked into going across the border, and they discover that they've been sold. And it's, some of these marriages work out, and it's hard to say, but there could be, there could be tens of thousands of women hiding, married, quote unquote, to Chinese men and living happily, or at least satisfactorily in China. But many of them, these marriages, are hellholes for the women, and the women try to get out on the Underground Railroad. And one other thing, just since you mentioned human trafficking, there's also a porn industry in China, of course, and sometimes these North Korean women are pressed into either brothels or into online pornography.
So besides going there and helping with the Underground Railroad or developing orphanages or fighting sex trafficking, what can individual Americans do? And let me be more specific of individual American Christians. And I'll be even more specific, individual American Christian college students. What can someone here who's interested in this possibly do?
I think the first very basic requirement, if we're going to help as a matter of public policy, help these people, is to educate more Americans that this problem exists. Very few people I talked to when I started to research the book, and friends or family would ask me what I was going to write about, I would tell them about the Underground Railroad, and they didn't know about it. There were two exceptions to that. Occasionally I'd meet a foreign policy wonk whose specialty was China, and he had heard of it because it's a public policy issue in China. The other group were evangelicals, and I ran across a number of evangelicals who were aware of the issue. But as a matter of general observation, I would say almost nobody has heard of this. I also think we need to be more, and college students can be very effective here, both in educating other college students, but also in a call to action. There's a group called Liberty in North Korea, or LINK, run out of Torrance, California. It is a secular group, but most of the people who are part of it are Christian and are motivated to help because of their Christian beliefs. And they raise awareness, and they also have a program that aims to bring 100 people out of China every year to safety. If you're interested, I would urge you to get involved with LINK.
And I'll turn this over in just a couple minutes to questions from y'all, but let me ask, hey, we're in a presidential campaign, policy questions. What should American policy be towards North Korea in a way that can actually help the people of North Korea?
I think we need to bring the issue of human rights into our dealings with North Korea. Right now, human rights, if they're raised or are raised very quietly, they're totally subordinate to all the other issues, specifically the nuclear issue. Think about the Soviet Union. We always talked to the Soviet Union and made demands on human rights issues. We don't do the same with North Korea, and I think we should. I also think, and this is probably a bridge too far for any administration, I also think our policy should be the bringing down the Kim family regime and the peaceful reunification of the Koreas under a free and democratic system.
Questions from any of you? Over here. Oh, here comes the microphone.
Thank you. What's the current population of North Korea, and what's the estimated percentage of those trying to escape now?
The current population is about 24 million, and so far 24,000 have made it to safety in South Korea. Remember, that's since 1953, so it's over a very long period. I have no idea how many are trying to escape. If I had to estimate, I would say probably, 23,500,000. You know, the elites of the regime is a very small number of people, and everybody else lives in enormous, very bad conditions. So, I really do feel that as a matter of public policy, to answer your question too, we should also have more public policies that help bring information, send information into North Korea so that more people can try to escape.
Thank you for being here. My question is, during the Olympics, there were stories about several North Korean medalists who credited the Kim family with their success immediately, and kind of the response of the foreign press, and sort of been surprised at this reaction, and also stories that they did on medalists and athletes who competed in games and international competitions, and then if they did not medal, were sent to camps. I guess it's twofold. First of all, is it genuine? Do they believe that, do they credit like the Kim family and people like that with their success out of fear of repercussion, or, as you said, is their mindset? So do they believe this genuinely?
It's a difficult question to answer, but based on my interviews of people who've gotten out, I believe that there's been a sea change in North Korea in the past 10 or 15 years. And if you'd asked the same question 20 years ago or 15 years ago, the answer would have been, oh yeah, they really believe that the Kim family regime is everything, and it's the sun, the moon, and the stars. But today, that's not the case anymore. Based on the interviews I've had, I would say that there's huge skepticism about the regime, and that people understand that it doesn't work the way they thought it worked. I do believe those stories about repercussions. I know of examples of people who have been shipped off to the Gulag for not performing well or not doing what the regime has asked them to do. So I think that is a very genuine fear on the part of the North Korean athletes, that if they don't do well, they or their families would suffer. And also, let me just mention the family issue, if I may, just very briefly. It's a digression. But one of the means of control that is very persuasive is that the regime believes in or enforces punishment under 3 generations, so that if a person is convicted is even the wrong word because there's no court of law. If a person is said to have committed a political crime, he can go off to prison, and along with him go his parents and his children. Diplomats who are sent overseas to work at an embassy are sometimes required to leave a child at home as a kind of hostage, so that if they defected or did not perform well, they know that the price of their defection is the life of a child.
Has the Chinese or North Korean government made any statements about a response to a change in U.S. policy towards North Korea?
You mean encouraging a change, asking for change in U.S. policy, or?
Would they have some sort of? Do they already have planned some sort of response if we start changing our policy to basically improve the lives of the North Koreans?
Oh, no. China, it's not a priority for China. I think North Korea, issues statements that are comical, actually, if they weren't so horrifying. Whenever the United States brings up anything they don't like. I know that the Committee on Human Rights in North Korea, a wonderful research group in Washington, did a report on the North Korean Gulag a few months ago, and North Korea issued a statement calling it all lies and talking about how bad jails were in America. The Chinese government, I think you've put your finger on a key to change in North Korea. Right now, China is the main supporter of North Korea. It supplies most of its food and most of its fuel. And I think U.S. policy could be more aggressive about working with China to try to persuade China to change its policy and persuade it that this is not a regime it wants to see continue.
I just wanted to thank you again for coming to campus. This has been fascinating to listen to. I wanted to ask you, in your experience of talking with refugees who have escaped either South Korea or the United States, have they been able to acclimate to living in liberty, and are there support systems in place to help them get on their feet?
That really is a crucial question. Under the presidency of Lee Myung-bak in South Korea, there's been a lot more done in South Korea by the government to help North Koreans who escape. It's been a problem. There's a lot of prejudice in South Korea against North Koreans. And that, again, is changing, I think, through the fact that now there's so many there that South Koreans are beginning to meet North Koreans, and it is improving. At the same time, remember, a North Korean comes to a place like South Korea, a very high-powered, free market, free system kind of place, and the qualities that served him well in North Korea, which is being passive, stay out of sight, just do what you're told, don't serve him well in society, in South Korean society. There, like here, initiative is rewarded. In North Korea, initiative is punished. So it's a big problem. In my view, it's a problem for older people, but for teenagers and those probably, and children and those under the age of 30, they're much more adaptable, and they can take advantage of government programs to help them get jobs or come to the United States or go to college. Also, the Christian community in South Korea is extremely supportive of the North Koreans there, and so that's another way where they can get support.
Korea are they're basically told things about South Korea and perhaps about the Western world in general that make it more difficult for them when they actually get over there. So could you, like, based on the people you interviewed, could you kind of give us a more specific idea of what kinds of things they're taught about South Korea and the West, and maybe how the government teaches them these things?
Well, one thing they're taught is that the United States started the Korean War, which the truth is the exact opposite, that Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, invaded, not the other way around. Another example, just let me give you one example from a young woman I interviewed, a girl about the age of the young women in this audience. Her father escaped, and then, I won't go through the long story, but he is settled in Florida. And to make a long story short, he said he wanted to get his 2 daughters out, and he arranged with a broker to do that. And when the girls heard at the last minute that they weren't going to China, they were going to America, they freaked out. And one of them told me she remembered the sign, a poster on the wall of her school that showed American soldiers bayoneting a pregnant Korean woman during the Korean War. That was her image of what Americans were. The phrase, the word that the regime uses frequently to describe Americans is jackals. They always refer to the American jackals and their South Korean lackeys. So, that obviously they don't have a good image. We don't have a good image in North Korea, or at least we didn't. I think that's changing.
Have the Planned Parenthood organization in America, have they made any comments on the atrocities and abortions taking place in North Korea and China?
Not that I know of. Doesn't sound like the sort of issue they get involved in, unfortunately.
As we saw during Arab Spring, it is possible for regimes which have been long-standing to be brought down, particularly in Libya with Muammar Gaddafi. Are you proposing, or would you support a similar course of action where an allied organization such as NATO would assist rebels in North Korea with toppling the Kim regime?
I probably would, but we're a long way from that. There is no organized dissent in North Korea. And as I said, there's very little knowledge. It's changing, but there's little knowledge. At the same time, I will point out that these things, as you know, can happen very quickly. And I thought it was interesting that during the uprising in Libya, there were some North Korean contract workers, about 100 of them, working in Libya. And the regime would not let them come home. Because, in my view, and I should say the Secretary of Defense also said this, Leon Panetta, because it was afraid that they would spread information about what was going on. There's somebody over here, I think. Oh, no, yeah.
Yes, do you have any information about the Christian church in North Korea?
Yeah, I did write about that in one chapter called Jesus on the Border. And it's fascinating to me how many of the North Koreans, I have no idea what percentage, but many of the North Koreans who get to China and meet up with Christians make the decision to become Christians. I can't see into anybody's heart, so I can't tell you whether those acceptances of Christianity are genuine. I think they are in many cases. One thing that happens is that some of the North Koreans who have become Christians in China make the decision to go back to North Korea and try to win converts and plant churches. Again, I have no idea, nobody has any idea how successful this is. I interviewed a number of people who are involved in these operations, and a church in North Korea might be extremely small. It might consist only of a husband and wife. And even the children are kept out of the loop until they're old enough to understand that their Christianity, their faith must be kept secret. It's very dangerous for anybody to proselytize in North Korea. Any religion is against the law. And I've spoken to American missionaries who are divided in their view on whether it's a good idea to send North Koreans back into North Korea to plant churches. One view holds that it's our duty as Christians to spread the faith. Another view holds that, as one person said to me, you don't tie a baby Christian to the railroad tracks and wait for the train to roll over him.
You mentioned earlier that the North Korean refugees escaped to a variety of different countries. Is there information in terms of like a breakdown in percentages where they end up? I mean, China, South Korea, where most of them end up?
Well, there are probably tens of thousands hiding in China right now. At the peak, there were probably 500,000. And as I mentioned, 24,000 have made their way out of China to South Korea. Once they get to Southeast Asia, they don't stay there. They either go on to South Korea in most cases, or a few come to the United States. We've accepted about 135. Last I checked, a very tiny number. Some have gone to Europe. About 100 have gone to Canada. But most of the people who get out of China want to go to South Korea, and who can blame them? It's a familiar culture, it's a familiar language, the government supports them, and private groups support them. And it's one of the interesting things I discovered in my research is that every North Korean I met eventually wants to go home to North Korea. He sees himself as someday going back to a free country and helping to build his country.
Would you say the majority of South Koreans support reunification with North Korea?
Yes, I think the majority support reunification, but they're also very worried about the economic costs of reunification. They look at Germany and they see that the gap between East and West Germany was large and the cost was huge, and the gap between the South and the North Koreans is even wider. So they're worried about it. I would say that under the leadership of President Lee Myung-bak, the current president, there's been greater discussion about it and greater discussion about the moral necessity of reunification. And I think he's also talked about preparing for unification and bringing in other countries to help with it so that South Korea doesn't have to bear the burden alone.
This isn't something that has been mentioned yet, but so I'm not sure if it relates closely to the topic of your book, but I'm curious from your extensive knowledge of East Asia. I know South Korea has made a lot of efforts to get South Korean propaganda into North Korea, allowing North Koreans to maybe have a different perspective on the West or on South Korea. And a lot of those have been in the form of television shows, thumb drives, that sort of thing. In your opinion, have those been have they been successful or beneficial, or is there much more to be done there?
I write about, in my chapter, The Information Invasion, I talk about this quite a bit. It's less the government than it is private organizations, often run by North Koreans who've already escaped, and supported by, in the U.S., the National Endowment for Democracy, and perhaps by the Korean government. But you know, it's very hard to assess what works. I think it's important to have a whole range of inputs into North Korea. We know for a fact that the radio broadcasts have an impact. Let me just give you, by way of background, if you buy a radio in North Korea, you are required to register it with the government, and the radio is fixed to the government's radio station. With the TV, the channel there is also fixed to the government TV station. If you tamper with your radio so that you can get the foreign radio broadcast, you know, if you're caught doing it, it's a political crime and you're punished. But many people do that. And we know this because there have been surveys of refugees living in China, and a high percentage of them have listened to foreign radio broadcasts. And it's been their experience, the knowledge that they've gleaned from listening to those radio broadcasts that have helped to encourage them to leave. The TV shows from South Korea, especially soap operas, are very popular in the underground in North Korea. Most North Koreans don't have DVDs, but they have, you know, maybe somebody does, and especially in Pyongyang, and they can watch them there. And that's very positive, because if you can change the minds of the elites who live in Pyongyang through you know, South Korean TV shows, that's a good thing. Years ago, I interviewed Ana Palacio, who was the foreign minister of Spain, and she talked about growing up in Spain in the 1950s when it was a fascist country, you know, ruled by Franco. And she said American movies had an impact on her thinking and helped her aspire to liberty. And similarly, I think that the soap operas and other shows that are beginning to circulate illicitly in North Korea could have an effect on changing minds there.
See, last question. I'm just wondering, this is really, again, a terrific job of reporting. For the future journalist here, how did you do it? How long did it take? Where'd you go? How many miles before you slept?
It took me about 2 years to research and report the book. I had a pretty good base on which to build because I had written editorials and op-eds about this subject for the Wall Street Journal over the years. The reporting, I interviewed a lot of refugees. I always had to have a translator because I don't speak Korean. The interviews were lengthy because you have to take time to build up trust and get people to talk to you. The rescuers I interviewed were very helpful in that regard. They often spoke English, so I could interview them. But if they told a refugee to trust me, the refugee often would do so. So, you know, sources help. I had built up a reputation as somebody who cared about the North Korean human rights issue over the years through the many articles I'd written for the Wall Street Journal. And so I had that foundation on which to build. Obviously, people are very skittish about talking about this subject publicly. But I think because of the reputation I had built over the years, it helped. The same held true, interestingly, for government officials. I interviewed officials of our own government and of South Korea, of course, and then of governments in Southeast Asia. And nobody would go on the record. Again, because they consider this issue very sensitive and they don't want to talk about it. But they were willing to talk to me about the policy issues. I also talked to people who helped North Koreans here and to people who are advocates for North Koreans in the United States. They were easier to talk to because, of course, it was English. You also had to be very careful in talking to a lot of these people about, I couldn't check, obviously, that what they told me was true, but I had to develop a sense of whether something was right, whether it comported with what I knew about North Korea or about the refugee experience. And that took a while to develop as well.
Yeah. Tomorrow at 12:20, we'll have an interview here with Claude Allen, who, a very bright guy with a very distinguished career, became President Bush's top domestic policy advisor, and then 6 years ago did something wrong and very embarrassing. And if any of you have ever had a situation like that where you've done something that you just want to hide in a hole and depart, I think it'll be interesting to hear him tomorrow about how he's recovered from that. So that's tomorrow, 12:20. Right now, please join me in thanking Melanie Kirkpatrick for writing a wonderful book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that there's a lot of interest on this campus about the North Korea issue, and I think it would be appropriate for us to just close in prayer for our involvement. And Hannah, I'm going to ask you if you come up and pray for us.
Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for Ms. Kirkpatrick and for just her tremendous knowledge and her ability to just articulate what she has learned and gathered from her time in Asia and from interviewing refugees. And I ask that you would give us as a campus wisdom and lay it on our hearts, Lord God, how we can specifically help, either help refugees or help in the North Korean situation itself, Lord. Just open our eyes with wisdom and please give us willing hands to work here. And I thank you for just this tremendous opportunity and this blessing this afternoon. In your name, amen.
Amen.